The station was alive with noise, shoes colliding against marble floors, suitcases dragging, announcements echoing in metallic voices. Yet in the middle of all that motion, she stood still, pressed against the cold column, her fingers clutching a small leather suitcase that seemed heavier than it should. The red scarf around her neck, creased, frayed at the edges, fluttered slightly each time the glass doors opened and the evening wind slipped inside. Her eyes moved slowly, searching. Not for anyone in particular, but for something, an anchor, a sign, a reason not to collapse right here between strangers. A man brushed past, muttering into his phone, and the impact almost knocked the suitcase from her grip. She pulled it closer, as though the cracked brass lock on it was guarding her last piece of dignity. She whispered to herself, a voice only the scarf could hear, "Just hold on. Just hold on." A train roared by, its gust lifting her hair across her face. She didn't move it. The mess of strands felt safer, like a veil. Through that curtain, she caught a reflection in the polished glass of the vending machine across from her, tired eyes, sharp with something unspoken, almost dangerous. Her phone buzzed inside her pocket. She didn't check it immediately. She already knew what it was, the new rent notice. Again. The number climbing higher than her heartbeat could manage. She finally pulled it out, thumb trembling, and the bright screen carved her face in pale light. Raised. Again. The scarf trembled with her breathing. People kept moving around her, children tugging parents toward candy stands, couples arguing over tickets, but her world had narrowed to that glowing notification. She could almost hear her landlord's voice, smooth and smug, "If you can't afford it, maybe this place isn't for you." Her grip tightened on the suitcase handle until her knuckles paled. For a moment, she thought about letting it go, just dropping everything right here, walking out into the street, disappearing into the blur of headlights. But then, her gaze fell on a cracked wristwatch strapped around her arm. The glass had been broken years ago, but she never replaced it. The hands were frozen at a meaningless hour, but it still ticked inside, faintly, like a secret heartbeat only she could hear. The watch reminded her, time wasn't finished with her yet. She raised her head slowly, as if surfacing from underwater. Around her, no one noticed. But in her chest, something sharp had shifted, almost like resolve, though it still hurt to breathe it. Her lips parted, barely moving, whispering words too soft for the station to catch, "Enough." And in that single syllable, something began. She shifted the suitcase against her leg, its worn handle digging into her palm. A child rushed past, giggling, nearly tripping over her foot, and for a flicker of a second, she almost smiled. But then the sound of laughter sank into her chest like a stone, reminding her how long it had been since she'd felt that light. She looked down at the suitcase again. The leather was peeling, corners bruised from years of travel. Her father had given it to her the day she left home for the city. He had pressed it into her hands, his voice steady even as his eyes betrayed him. "Carry it well," he'd said. "Not just the bag, yourself." She could still feel the weight of his hand on hers, guiding her fingers to the brass lock. That was years ago. Since then, the suitcase had seen cramped rooms, endless job applications, late-night studying bills spread across a floor like puzzle pieces with no solution. Now it was all she had left, this bag, this scarf, this cracked watch. A trinity of survival. A woman across the hall threw her arms around a man just stepping off the train, their embrace a collision of joy. She turned her face away. Nobody was waiting for her. Nobody ever was. The announcement board flickered red, delayed. The train she was supposed to take, stalled somewhere outside the city. The delay gave her more time to sit with herself, though she wasn't sure if that was mercy or punishment. She adjusted her scarf, fingers brushing its frayed threads. Her mother used to wear one just like it, crimson against her dark hair. She remembered clinging to it as a little girl, hiding her face in its warmth while her parents argued behind closed doors. The scarf carried the memory of love and fracture, of protection and absence all at once. It was a shield, even now. A man stood a few feet away, quiet, too quiet. He wasn't pretending to read his phone like everyone else. He wasn't restless or lost. He was simply watching. Not staring, just observing, as though he knew something she didn't. Their eyes met for a second, and it jolted her. She looked away, pulse racing, unsure if she wanted to be seen or disappear completely. She sat down on the cold bench, suitcase balanced on her knees. Her hand hovered over the cracked watch, tracing the broken glass. The frozen hands pointed nowhere, yet the faint ticking inside reminded her she was still here, still moving forward even when everything else stood still. The man shifted slightly, like he'd taken one step closer. She caught the movement in the corner of her eye, but when she turned, he was still, a faint smile playing at the edges of his mouth, too soft to read, too strange to ignore. Her breath hitched. She should have looked away. She didn't. And for a moment longer than she meant to, she hesitated. The board above flickered again. Another delay. The station groaned with restless sighs, shifting feet, crumpling snack wrappers. Outside, through the high glass panels, the sky had begun to bruise, clouds thickening, the kind that carried rain heavy enough to wash things clean or drown them completely. She drew her scarf tighter. The air carried that metallic taste right before a storm. The man was still near. Not hovering, not intrusive, just there. His stillness unsettled her more than the chaos around them. When he shifted to sit on the far end of her bench, her suitcase pressed against her knees like a shield. Her eyes lowered, unwilling, then rose again on their own. That's when she noticed his shoes. Worn at the edges, soles thinning, the kind of wear that comes from walking too far, for too long. Not the shoes of someone who waited comfortably in life. And when he leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees, something slipped from his jacket pocket, a photograph, folded, edges frayed. He caught it quickly, but not before she glimpsed a child's face, a girl with wild hair and a smile that didn't hide her missing tooth. Her chest tightened. That photo, it looked like something he carried not for display, but survival. She knew that kind of weight. Her cracked watch ticked faintly, hidden heartbeat against her skin. His scuffed shoes, her frayed scarf. His folded photo, her battered suitcase. For a moment, she saw herself inside him, as though he were an invisible mirror reflecting the pieces she tried to hide. Rain tapped the glass roof above, soft at first, then heavier. Drops streaked the panels, blurring the world beyond, smudging light into uncertain shapes. Inside, the air cooled. Her breath left fog against the glass wall beside her. She told herself she should leave, find another train, another way, anything but this delay. But her body betrayed her. She stayed seated, listening to the rain, stealing glances at him. Why did she feel tethered? Was it recognition, or danger? Her landlord's voice came back to her like a hiss, reminding her of bills stacked higher than she could climb, of the humiliation of begging for extensions, of hearing laughter in the background of his calls. It's not personal, he had said once, smug. But wasn't it? The man on the bench shifted again. This time, when their eyes met, he didn't look away. He held her there, steady, as though he'd been waiting for her to notice fully. Her hand tightened on the suitcase. The watch ticked. The rain thundered harder, drowning out announcements. She opened her mouth, not knowing what she meant to say. He almost smiled. And in that suspended moment, caught between leaving and staying, between recognition and risk, she didn't know if she had found fate, or if fate had found her. The storm outside had deepened. Each crack of thunder rattled through the glass ceiling, shaking loose something inside her chest. The suitcase felt heavier now, her palms slick against the leather handle. She stood abruptly, as if motion alone could save her from drowning in that air thick with waiting. Her steps were quick, too quick. Toward the exit, toward the blur of rain-streaked doors. She could vanish into the city's wet streets, into anonymity, into the kind of running she'd perfected all her life. But halfway across the hall, she faltered. Her reflection in the vending machine caught her, the red scarf clinging to her neck, the cracked watch peeking from her sleeve, the suitcase dragging behind. A girl walking away again. A girl who'd never stopped running. Her throat burned. She turned, just once, for a last look. And there he was. Still on the bench. But something was different. Her suitcase wasn't in her hand anymore. Somehow, she had dropped it in her rush, and now it sat by his feet. His fingers rested lightly on the brass lock, not prying, not claiming, just holding it steady, as if keeping it safe from the crowd. For a long second, the station noise dimmed. The sight struck her harder than the thunder. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence. That thought slid through her mind like a whisper not her own. Nearby, a mother tugged her child closer, eyes flicking toward the man as though his stillness was something to fear. A couple passed, the woman muttering under her breath, "Strange one, sitting like that." Society's quiet judgment seeped through the air, the way it always did, branding anyone who didn't fit neatly into its rhythm. But he didn't move. Didn't defend himself. His silence was not weakness. It was weight. She walked back slowly, each step heavy, deliberate. The rain hammered louder, dripping through a small leak in the roof, drops splashing on the bench between them. When she reached him, her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. His hand lifted first, offering it back. Their fingertips brushed, the smallest collision, yet it jolted her like lightning. Her scarf fluttered against the current of air rushing from the station doors. The watch ticked faintly beneath her sleeve. She met his eyes. There was no demand there, no story offered, no explanation given. Only a quiet acknowledgement, like two storms recognizing each other. Her lips parted. She wanted to speak, to name this strange tether, but all she managed was a thin breath that carried no words. And so it hung there, between suitcase and scarf, between silence and thunder, an unfinished moment neither of them claimed, yet neither could leave behind. The rain had eased into a steady rhythm, tapping the glass roof like a clock she could almost hear. She clutched the suitcase tighter now, though her fingertips still remembered the warmth of his hand. Her phone buzzed again. She almost ignored it, but the screen caught her eye, an email notification. She froze. It was from the company she had applied to last week, the one she had prayed over in whispered breaths late at night. The message was short, almost cruel in its efficiency. Interview confirmed. Building address attached. Her heart kicked. The building's name shimmered on the screen, the letters too sharp to miss. She glanced up. And then it struck her. The man. The one beside her, silent storm in worn shoes. She had seen his face before, not here, but on the company's website, buried in the About Us section she had studied obsessively. Not a CEO. Not a polished executive. But the quiet majority owner. The man who had stayed in shadows while others took credit. Her breath fractured. She lowered her gaze to the suitcase, still pressed against her knees. His daughter's photograph came back to her, the wild-haired girl, the missing tooth smile. A memory not hers, but now bound to her in some strange way. Her mind reeled. The suitcase. The photo. The watch. The scarf. Pieces clicking together with terrifying softness. And then his voice came, low, almost lost under the rain, but clear enough. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence. The words twisted inside her, echoing her own thought from before, circling back like a time loop she hadn't realized she was inside. She gripped the cracked watch, pressing the frozen glass against her palm until it hurt. Time wasn't finished with her yet, but maybe it wasn't finished with him either. For the first time in years, she felt the edges of choice sharpen into something irreversible. If she walked away now, she could pretend none of this mattered. Another rejection, another night in her small, overpriced room. Survival, but nothing more. But if she stepped forward, toward the building in that email, toward him, she would cross a line she could never uncross. Her chest tightened. The scarf shifted against her breath. Her father's words returned, carved into memory. Carry it well, not just the bag, yourself. Slowly, she stood. The suitcase thudded against the ground. The next announcement crackled over the station's speakers, muffled by the storm. Boarding now, last call. Her eyes flicked to him one last time. He didn't stop her. Didn't move. Only watched, with that same unreadable silence. And then, her hand pushed open the heavy glass door. She stepped into the rain, into the city's blur, into a decision that would change everything. The building loomed in glass and steel, a world away from the crowded station. She stood before it, suitcase in hand, rain dripping from the edges of her scarf. The same suitcase that had nearly slipped from her forever now felt like a weight she was meant to carry here. Inside, the lobby was silent except for the polished click of her shoes against the marble floor. She could feel eyes on her, receptionists, guards, men in suits. People who judged before knowing, their glances sharp as knives. But she did not flinch. Not this time. The cracked watch ticked faintly against her wrist. She held it like a pulse, steadying herself. And then she saw him. The man from the station. No longer shadow, no longer still. Here, he stood behind glass doors, speaking quietly with a secretary. His posture was heavier, his silence not a mask but a mantle. When his gaze rose and found her, time staggered. She expected him to look away. He didn't. Instead, he stepped forward, pushing open the doors. In his hand, her suitcase. She hadn't even noticed she'd left it behind in her storm of choices. When he placed it at her feet, his voice was soft but unyielding. This belonged to my daughter once. Her breath cracked. She looked down at the worn leather, the brass lock she had thought was hers alone. Suddenly the scuffs, the weight, the way it never seemed to break, it all shifted meaning. The suitcase wasn't just memory. It was inheritance, passed from grief into her hands like a ghost's touch. She knelt, fingers trembling on the handle. "Why me?" she whispered. His eyes, lined with years she could not measure, softened. "Because you carry yourself the way she did. Not just the bag, yourself." Her father's words, spoken years ago, returned in that moment like an echo answered. A circle closing. Tears blurred her vision. For a heartbeat, she thought this was fate's reward, that she was chosen, lifted, seen. But his next words cut deeper than rejection. "I don't choose you to stay," he said, quiet as rain. "I choose you because you remind me she was real. You carry what she cannot." The watch ticked once more, frozen hands mocking her. The scarf around her neck felt suddenly lighter, as if releasing her from a grip she didn't know it held. She wanted to protest, to demand more. But instead, she breathed. For the first time, she let go, not of the pain, but of the need to own its outcome. She pressed the suitcase back toward him. Then let her rest. Carry it for her. Not for me. His silence broke only in the tremor of his fingers as he accepted it. The weight returned to him, but lighter somehow, shared. She turned toward the glass doors, stepping into the city night. The station echoed in her memory, the chaos, the silence, the thunder. Only now, she was not the girl pressed against a column, clutching at survival. She was the one walking away, her hands free. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The streets were still damp, rainwater glimmering under the streetlights like broken glass stitched into the pavement. She walked without rushing now, each step unhurried, her scarf trailing lightly against the evening wind. Her hands were empty. For the first time in years, she wasn't clutching a suitcase, wasn't gripping a strap or handle as if her survival depended on it. The absence felt strange, like walking without a shadow. But it also felt like release. When she reached her apartment, the silence of the room didn't sting as it usually did. She placed the cracked watch on the small table by the window. Its frozen hands caught the faint moonlight, and though it no longer kept time, it seemed to hold it, a reminder that some moments don't move forward, but stay with you forever. The red scarf she draped over the chair. Frayed, yes. Worn, yes. But it had outlasted storms, carried voices she refused to forget. She touched it gently, as though thanking it for the weight it had borne in her silence. She sat by the window, watching the city breathe. Cars passed, people laughed in groups she would never join, but she didn't shrink from it. She simply observed. For once, she was not outside of life, but beside it. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her mind, that same phrase he'd given her so long ago: carry it well, not just the bag, yourself. Tonight, she finally understood what it meant. And then, softer still, another line, one she hadn't expected to keep: sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. She whispered it into the empty room, and it didn't sound hollow. The suitcase was gone. The man, too. But the silence they left her with was not the kind that crushed. It was the kind that stretched, open, unfinished, waiting. She leaned back, her eyes closing for a breath, for a pause. The watch ticked faintly in her memory, though it hadn't ticked in years. Outside, the rain had stopped. And in the quiet, a thought rose, not sharp but lingering, like smoke refusing to vanish. What if the people we meet aren't meant to save us, but only to remind us we were never lost? The night held no answer. Only the city, only the silence, only the open space she now carried inside her.